Hello everyone, and welcome to ＳivilNet. Today our guest is Rasmus Canbäck, an investigative journalist for the Swedish online platform Blankspot. His work is focused on covering Azerbaijan's lobbying strategies since the 2020 Karabakh War. He's the author of a recent opinion piece for The Insider called The Hypocrisy of Caviar Diplomacy: How Azerbaijan Still Manages to Avoid European Sanctions. Thanks for being here, Rasmus.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Great. Well, in the article, you say that despite a crackdown of Azerbaijani civil society accelerating to a level that stands out globally, the question that Armenian analysts and Azerbaijani civil society activists have been asking together for years is, where are the red lines for the EU to impose sanctions? But I would ask you to explain why first. What did you find? How do EU officials feel about this situation? Why does Azerbaijan get a pass?
So, I've been comparing the case of Azerbaijan with other authoritarian regimes in the close neighborhood of the EU. We're looking at what's called the Eastern Partnership. And in the Eastern Partnership, we have countries like Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Belarus. Belarus, the red lines for Belarus have been lower than the ones for Azerbaijan, even though we have seen quite a similar development in the country. So we had sanctions against Belarus in 2010 after the presidential elections and the crackdown on the civil society. This happened in Azerbaijan as well during the same period of time, and now it happens again. And yet, we are asking ourselves, okay, so why are there no sanctions, like economic sanctions, against Azerbaijan? The answer to the question, there are it's complicated, of course. I mean, we have two or three different aspects of it. One is the geopolitical location of Azerbaijan. It's located in, I would call it a rotating door, because it's in the north we have Russia, and in the south we have Iran. Both of them have economic sanctions against them. At the same time, it becomes the door to the Central Asia and China in the long run, with the middle corridor, as we call it. It's a transport corridor. Politicians and diplomats in the EU, they are very reluctant to do anything drastic because imposing economic sanctions against Azerbaijan, it would be also closing this door. But I said it was rotating, right? So we have one corridor from east to the west, China to the EU. And then we have a corridor which is from the north to the south, Russia, down to Asia as well, through Azerbaijan. So it's a rotating door. So this is one aspect. The other aspect, which I also write about in the article, is the caviar diplomacy. Sometimes, especially in Armenian social media, we can see that it's exaggerated as the main reason why there are no economic sanctions against Azerbaijan. I would say it's one of the reasons. So the geopolitical situation, together with the caviar diplomacy, creates, this notion of that Azerbaijan is an important partner, a reliable partner, as Ursula von der Leyen would say, for the EU.
And that middle corridor is exactly it. As you write about in your article, it's the real reason, apparently, why Azerbaijan gets such leeway in the global considerations. Not its energy resources, which is what we all think of, it's oil and gas, but we know that's actually really exaggerated, how much they even have and what it does for the EU, maybe 2 or 3% total. They could find other ways around that. So is it this middle corridor that is what's really fueling it?
It's oil and gas, it's one of the reasons, of course, but when I started looking at this more profoundly the last 6 months, I just realized that all of the lobbyism from Azerbaijan is not about oil and gas. I mean, it's mentioned oil and gas, but the main theme and the main topic, if you go back since 2020 war, is the middle corridor, and this is something that analysts, they have been missing out on, I believe, quite a lot. And in the end of January this year, just 2 months after the EU decided that there would be no economic sanctions against Azerbaijan for the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, they they gave the middle corridor, or they increased the funding of the middle corridor with 10.4 billion euros. That's a lot of money. The reason, yet again, we go back to geopolitics. What we can see right now with the war in Palestine and Israel and the attacks from the Houthi rebels against the freight ships that goes to China, this has been the only and the major transport corridor to Eastern Asia. So the middle corridor is important, and this is something that the World Bank also has emphasized. And so with this said, the middle corridor is really something that we shouldn't, it's really something that we shouldn't underestimate as the main concern for the EU.
Now, another thing, you mentioned caviar diplomacy, which of course is one of the more notorious exports of Azerbaijan. And you described in the article, when the question arose, as you referenced, for the EU, whether it would impose sanctions on Azerbaijan, there was a clear majority, you say, in the Swedish parliament wanting to do so. However, the same day as the parliamentary discussions going on, the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs gave additional funding to the think tank ISDP, which has ties to Azerbaijan. The ministry did not agree with imposing sanctions, and the negotiation resulted in a compromise which decided that sanctions could serve as a tool in the future, maybe down the line, but not right now. So what's going on here? And especially, I think ISDP, you say, has some real significance that we should take note of.
Okay, let's start in the end of how do you actually decide on sanctions in the EU? And this is done by all the member states, the 27 member states. So Sweden is just one of them. So what happened is that Sweden was actually one of the initiators to bring this to the agenda of the EU after the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, that now we need to discuss whether how should we actually perceive Azerbaijan in the future. So in September, October, and then in November, they were discussing these issues in the ministerial council of the EU. And on November 13, they met, and before that, all the parliaments in the different countries, they were preparing their own stance on this. So Sweden prepared one stance, which before the negotiations in the parliament, 7 out of 8 parties, they were saying that, okay, let's have sanctions. We want sanctions against Azerbaijan. But then the MFA of Sweden came and said that no, we're not going to have sanctions. So they found a compromise, which means that sanctions can be used as a tool. What's interesting is that when we looked at what the EU later said, because of course there are 27 member states with different views on this. France was probably more pro sanctions, the Netherlands and so on as well. And then we can see Hungary and Romania, they would not want sanctions, so it would probably not be sanctions anyway. But when I compared the writings from or the formulation on the sanctions on the red lines from the EU, it was very similar to the ones from the Swedish Parliament, which I found interesting. And ISDP, which is funded by the Swedish government since 16 years back. They are a think tank, so-called independent think tank, but they have been receiving money from Azerbaijan since many years back, until 2022. So first they received money from something is called the Azerbaijan European Society, which was banned from the Council of Europe for its bribery in 2018, and ISDP was funded by them for 3 years. And then they were funded by a construction company owned by the Aliyev family. And I asked, what is a think tank in Sweden doing with money from a construction company in Azerbaijan? The interesting part about ISDP is that they have, throughout the years, become a hub for pro-Azerbaijani academics. So they have an office in Stockholm and they have an office in Washington, D.C., which is a joint office together with the American Foreign Policy Institute. I think they're called that, or just American Foreign Policy, with the chairman, Frederick Starr. And Frederick Starr, he's also one of the board members of one of the state universities in Azerbaijan, ADA. So you can see all these connections and all these and all these this research being done in ISDP, and just 1 month, not even a month, three weeks after the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, Svante Kornell and Brenda Schaffer, another famous name within Caviar Diplomacy, they published a report which was emphasizing the role of Azerbaijan in the Middle Corridor. So this narrative comes back all the time.
It seems we have a direct line of Aliyev money into a think tank, which is then directly connected to the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is then writing the policy on Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia, Azerbaijan. And so it seems like a real conflict of interest here. And you end your article with a strong point saying what you call the clash between realpolitik and humanitarian policy, others call hypocrisy. So do the EU policymakers frame it this way, or is that your framing? And do you see this as a clash?
It's not my. It's my framing. This is not. If you speak to diplomats, they would never admit this. Of course, they would use some soft and nice words to describe it in different ways. But it's something that comes back. Analysts they've been elevating back to this all the time. Okay, so how much should we consider what's happening in Azerbaijan versus imposing economic sanctions? One thing that I have seen is when I talk to analysts is that they have had the same narrative for maybe 10-15 years about Azerbaijan. If the EU is pushing Azerbaijan to away from the EU, they say that they will get closer to Russia. And this is, the only thing that has happened for 10 years or 15 years is that Azerbaijan has had a more intense crackdown on the civil society. It has attacked Nagorno-Karabakh, ethnically cleansed Nagorno-Karabakh, and became closer to Russia and closer to EU at the same time, but nothing else has happened. So the big winner in this diplomatic game is Azerbaijan, clearly, and this is a dilemma. Just a few weeks ago, I was speaking to some EU politicians about this, and they asked me the same question. So how should we act? How should we act? And the inaction is what is consistent.
It's been many years of enabling, and they've gotten down the road so far that I don't think they know how to turn it around now. So one more thing for you. Those who follow you on X know how your articles routinely get a great deal of attention, including from Azerbaijani officials. Tell us about how you use social media to bring attention to these important issues and spark debate.
So since Blankspot is a small website, we're just 3 people. We are very independent and we are fully crowdfunded and all this, just underlining this. So social media is an enabler to get the articles out, of course, and this is what we want. We want high impact articles. We're working a lot with social media. This is one issue. The other issue is that, I'm writing so much about politics and I'm writing so much about transparency. So social media is also a way for me to be transparent. And so the followers can follow me and see what I'm thinking and what I'm doing. So I'm writing about most of the things that I'm doing. I will also post on X or Facebook or Instagram or even WhatsApp channels or whatever. But the social media, I think sometimes the journalists they are afraid of using social media too much because it means that you also express your own opinion quite often, or there's a risk that you will express your own opinion. I try to navigate in this by not being so strong, even though it seems like I'm expressing my own opinion. I try to navigate so it's just for the sake of creating a debate, to creating thoughts from people. And sometimes I publish things just to see how people are reacting, so it helps me in my own work. It's part of my work routine and my daily routine to get these impressions.
Rasmus, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us here on CivilNet.